Okay, so what we're doing here is we're looking at different strategies for adjusting target colours. In this case, our colours that we want to adjust are red, blue and yellow. I've tried to keep it simple, done the primary colours, yeah. And we're going to look at different ways of doing that. With this one, let's start with this one, shall we? Let's have a look at this one first. So with this section here, these three here, what I'm doing is adjusting red, blue and yellow using black on this side and white on this side. So these are tints because they got white added to them. These are tones because they have black added to them. Yeah. Now this works pretty well with the blue because black is effectively very dark blue, and so when you add blue to blue, or very dark blue to a lighter blue, you've got two members of the same family, if you like. They're going to be very, very alike. They're going to get on very well, and they transition very nicely from blue into black. And of course, if you add white, all you're doing is make a tint, so you're just washing these colours out. Basically, you're losing saturation. Basically, actually, you are losing saturation either way, because black is a you know, for want of a better word, it's a kind of a chroma killer. It kills saturation. Black, the chroma killer, it kills saturation, and so that's what happens when you go this way. And if you actually killing saturation that way by adding white, interestingly, they both do the same thing. They're both, white and black are neutral. They have no colours in them, if you like, in pigment, and no colours in them in light. But they're both a neutrality, if you like, of colour. They're cancellation colour. Anyway, so what I've done here is I've added black to blue, and we've got that nice gradation there, tints, fair enough. What happens with the red is when I'm adding this black to the red, I'm adding blue to red, so this is effectively making these browner, because this is a warm red. Warm red has yellow in it. Okay, it's got overtones of yellow in it, which is making it warm because it's next to orange and yellow on the spectrum. And so when you're adding blue to it as well, which is black, you're then adding blue, red, and its yellow overtone, which is making this then a brown, because a predominantly red dark mix with those three primaries makes it brown. With the blue, it's okay, you get nice clean transitions. You might want to watch what blue you're using, warm blue and cool blue. You're adding, the cool blue will have a yellow overtone, warm blue will have a red overtone, and so again you could start muddying things up. So if you want to go from warm blue to warm blue dark, then you want to use a warm mid blue and a warm dark, warm black. That gets confusing, doesn't it? Who would have thought three colours could be so confusing? Anyway, now when we look at yellow, you can see that for the tints, it's you know, nice. You also notice that the steps in the yellow aren't actually as pronounced, as because there's practically no value in yellow, and so its ability to make tints from it are almost zero. There you can get about 2 or 3 before you get to white, clear tints. But with blue, it's got a massive colour potential, and so that's going to make, you know, tints that are 3 times as long in range in gradations if you want to. But the interesting thing, particularly with adding black to yellow, which is why black doesn't work very well as a strategy for darkening yellow, is that its blueness is very evident here. That it's made it green straight away, and so you've gone from yellow almost instantly to green, and then a black eventually. Type of black, be a greeny black, bluey black, purpley black. Okay. So what do you do? How do you darken yellow while still keeping the colours sort of sympathetic? Well, we've got some strategies here to do that, but let's have a look at another way of changing things on this side. Now here we're changing the target colours, red, blue and yellow, but we're using colours that are sympathetic to them on the spectrum. Let me just see if I can grab another diagram. Here's one I did earlier. Just brush the dust off that baby. you can see that next to, turn that the other way, you can see that next to red, our target red, on the right hand side, going darker is going to be magenta. It gets cooler, and on the left hand side, or going in towards yellow, we've got orange and yellow. So if you want to lighten this colour, you want to lighten this red, the next sort of the direction to go is to go this way on the spectrum, and to use colours adjacent to the colour, your target colour, in this case red. Use colours adjacent to it on the spectrum to lighten them up. So I'm using orange, then warm yellow, and then eventually it turns to cool yellow. And that's what's happening here. It starts with pigment PR254, which is Pyrrole red. Then I'm adding all I'm actually doing is adding PY35, which is cadmium yellow to it. So I'm taking my warm red, I'm adding a warm yellow to it, and I'm getting these lovely warm gradations of colour. Yeah. Still keeping all the saturation, but actually it's shifting along the spectrum, but it actually looks sympathetic to it. Yeah. And to make it darker, I've added the next colour on the spectrum to it, which is magenta, dark red, cool dark red. In this case I'm using PR122 quinacridone magenta. And what I've done is added magenta to the PR254, the Pyrrole, added magenta to it, and in increasing amounts of magenta until we've got to here, where I've maxed out the amount of magenta in it, and I've needed to add PB29, which is ultramarine blue, to get it darker. And if I wanted to go darker still, I'd just add more ultramarine blue. And ultramarine blue and magenta will make probably the darkest purple that you can make with the pigments that we've got available to us. Clean purple, that is. You know. And I've done the same here. We've done the same with blue. So you know, how do you lighten blue and keep its chroma? Well, or saturation, whichever way you want to use it. Get your target blue, which is where it's around there somewhere, isn't it? Yeah. And I've just added the colours next to it on the spectrum. So this is cyan, which is PG50. I'm using a Snellier PG50 there. And all I've done is I've started with PB15, which is phthalo blue, and I've added PG50, which is the cyan colour, to the phthalo blue, and it's given me the steps towards phthalo blue. And if I wanted to blend those, they would blend seemingly into one another, because they're next to one another on the spectrum, so they work together really well. Their overtones work together as well. And if you want to darken the spectrum, you need to add a warm blue, which is ultramarine blue. And so I've taken phthalo blue and added warm blue, which is, because phthalo blue is cool, all sorts of ways. It's cool in all sorts of ways. And I've added PB29, which is ultramarine blue, to it, and that's given me the steps from cool blue to transition into dark warm blue. And at this point I've added magenta, and that's given me my super dark bluey purple colour. Yeah, so that's red and blue. Yellow, this is the sort of the right way to go about it, I guess. But you can see that with yellow, again, just how few steps or easily identifiable steps there are to the eye between your target yellow here, which is cadmium yellow, towards the cool yellow. I mean, cadmium yellow to cool yellow is practically one step on the spectrum. Cadmium yellow, cool yellow, right next to one another on the spectrum. Okay, so when you blend these two together, you're going to get very few easily identifiable steps for your eye between the two, because they're right next to one another. These have got a few more steps to go. They've got more sort of steps to go on on the spectrum, so you can make more gradiated tints, or whatever you call them, with in that direction. Okay, not tints because you get white in them, but you know, steps. Going this way, I've just added PR254, which is Pyrrole red, because it's a warm red. I mean, you could use cadmium red or any other warm red with a yellow overtone. I've just added Pyrrole red to cadmium red. Cadmium red. We've got a warm one. I've added Pyrrole red to it, and that gives you then the steps towards orange. Now, you know, you can see these, it quickly changes, isn't it, to a darker step there, and then another one, and then another one. That's because it's going to take longer to get from here to the Pyrrole red on the spectrum than it is to get straight next door to its neighbour on the spectrum, which is lemon yellow. So that's why you've got a greater range of available hues of the same colour going that way. Okay. Now, lastly, what I've done is I've Muncelised this. I've just picked a random grey. They're more or less the same, are they? Yeah. I've mixed a random grey using titanium white PW6 and Mars black PBK11, and I've mixed a big old batch of this, and then what I've done is made a set of I mean, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps using the grey. So I've taken cadmium yellow to start with, and then I've added a tiny bit of grey, that target grey to it. And then I've added a little bit more grey, a little bit more grey, a little bit more grey, a little less cadmium, and until we've got to practically grey there, with hardly any cadmium in it. And we've got practically pure cadmium with hardly any grey in it there. So that's got hardly any cadmium. That's got hardly any grey in it, and that's just giving you a grey set of steps from decreasing in saturation, or chroma, if you want to use the Munsell term, going that direction. Same again with blue. Again, you can see that there are much clearer steps involved with the blue, because it's got a huge huge potential range of colours, the hues that you can get from that, or steps in that, compared to the yellow, which got hardly any at all, hardly any value. Tons of value in dark blue, probably the darkest of the colours on the spectrum for paint. This is talking about paint here all the time, of course, remember, I'm talking about light. So loads of steps, clear steps with blue, and very similar with red as well. I've done exactly the same with red, and we've gone across with red using just increasing amounts of grey, or increasing amounts, if it went that way, just increasing amounts of red, which I can't remember which way around I did it now, but anyway, there you go. Now, there's probably too much to say about Munsell, on this whole thing. Suffice to say, all he really is doing is decreasing the colour quantity, if you like, or the saturation, using a grey. Difficult to see. I find it difficult to see the point in that, but you know, argue with me if you want. But all he does is he grabs a range of whites and then increases the saturation of whites, you know, tones, greys, white to black, and downwards is. Anyway, let's forget about Munsell and move on. It's just boring. Let's look at this instead, which is far more interesting, and I'm not going to have to think very hard to explain that. Oh, there's a bit of dust. Look. This is a range of yellows. Actually, it's the same yellow. It's cadmium yellow, PY35. But what I've done is set up I've given you a load of earths to mix it with, to alter the hue and still keep the saturational chroma with the steps that you've got here. Okay, so with this one I've used PR101, which I think is red iron oxide, sometimes called Venetian red, or a whole host of other names. It's got a massive list of names, common names. And I've just mixed Venetian red, or PR101, with cadmium yellow, PY35, and that's giving me this lovely warm set of steps, gradually getting darker towards the PY1. On this side we've got the same colour PY35, and I've just added brown, burnt umber in this case, because BBR7 is burnt umber and it is also raw umber. The difference is the pigment in this one is calcined, or it's heated, literally burnt, and that's why it's burnt umber. And raw umber is raw because it's not cooked, it's uncooked, that one. Don't eat that one. Actually, don't eat either of them, they've got unpleasant toxins in them. So this one is burnt umber, and all I've done is added burnt umber to cadmium yellow, and we've got steps of cadmium to burnt umber, just adding increasing amounts of burnt umber to the cadmium yellow until we've got to almost pure burnt umber. Interesting, these are actually cooler than I anticipated, because burnt umber is normally quite a warm brown, but they've actually turned the yellow slightly green, which means there's a lot more blue in it than I anticipated, and I thought would be. Raw umber, I thought, is green to start with, and that has given me, you know, not exactly surprisingly, green steps towards raw umber. So actually, if you're using lemon yellow, that would be a great mix to add lemon yellow to that. Naturally green, it would naturally green that in that direction. And lastly, I've used violet, believe it or not. Yeah. PV23, and I've added violet to cadmium yellow, and it's given me lovely, clear, warm brown hues. Why is it brown? Because violet is, you know, basically red and blue, and I've added yellow to it. Red and blue and yellow, when there's a heavy dominant sort of red in it, is going to give you brown. So you can see from these that the dominant colour in the three primaries in this mix is going to be brown. Dominant colour here is green, so blue and yellow. And again, these two, burnt umber and the violet, make very similar mixes, really similar. You get a kind of yellow ochre around here somewhere. But these are very similar. And these are just, so all these are just different ways of adapting colour. I've focused a little bit more on yellow, because yellow is probably the hardest colour to alter, almost certainly because of its lack of value, and it's as soon as you actually add anything to it, you change it so dramatically. So I've tried to sort of show you sympathetic ways of adapting yellow, which you could use here as well. I mean, that you could bolt that onto the end of, almost onto the end of that. You can certainly bolt it onto here, but if you took that off and bolted it on there, you've got a whole strip of colour graduating from the dark red through the yellows to the lemon yellow. And that's it. There you go. There's 20 minutes, just under, on how to adapt target colours using different strategies, and I hope that was interesting.